Dear ladies and gentlemen, hello. I'm happy to welcome you here. One of the most important Gaidar forum sessions. We don't have very many people today in the audience. Easy to understand. Similarly, it was yesterday. Tax was crowded, customs fewer people, and here we have even fewer people. Because probably tax is something that concerns everybody, customs, some people, and forex control, maybe even less people are affected. But we believe this is an extremely important subject, simply doesn't apply to all. Some people think that it's not relevant to them. What are we going to discuss today is, well, how relevant the issue is right now, how important it is, and we've been discussing the subject. Well, it's the third round, the third year that we're discussing in this particular forum, in this particular audience. Anything new? While the process is moving, we see that the authorities are now listening to our ideas. Sometimes they share and agree, but they're kind of cautious in terms of speed of change. This may be the right approach. Like yesterday, this customs session I mentioned already, the attitude was similar. But what happened in the customs area? Initially, well, the top officials in the customs office did not want to change. Now they've changed their stance. They're ready to change. They're ready to accept best practices. And they're discussing those with us. And many the disagreements we may have is only in the timing, not on the essential things. And here, we're also in a stage where we're discussing the sequence of events. We don't have to persuade people that forex control, other jurisdictions don't have it. And people kind of aware generally right now that we don't need it in Russia any longer either. We can stop that. But the question is how to stop it, how to liberalize the situation so that we don't make harm. This is something we want to discuss today. Well, just a few more words as an intro, and then I give the floor to the main speaker. We believe that forex control, initially, that was a tool of macroeconomic regulation to prevent the outflow of capital, assure the stability of domestic currency, etc. Well, today we're going to discuss whether we need this right now. Do we need this tool to assure macroeconomic stability? Two other objectives of that law, in fact, not in the spirit of the law, but in the letter of the law. Well, those other two ideas is assuring helping tax administration and counteracting money laundering and other criminal activities. Do these issues have to be addressed by the forex law or other regulations? That's another matter we are going to discuss here. I offer for consideration and discussion here. We're going to moderate this session today. My name is Sergei Sinelnikov. I'm Vice Rector of the Russian Academy of Foreign Studies, and Anastasia Antonina Levashenko, researcher in this particular RANEPA Academy, and we will co-moderate the discussion, and Antonina is going to present other participants. Yes, it's a first session devoted to the subject, second time in this particular audience, and roughly the same composition of the panel. But today we have very good news. We have the central bank. They agreed to join the session. Very important, because the central bank, one of the participants, key players in the reform of forex control. And let me use this opportunity to present the speakers from that side. Pavel Trunin, lead researcher of the Academy, my colleague, who is one of the authors on a report on the reform of forex control. You can get a copy all printed on what we're talking about in this report, that we don't see macroeconomic risks if we repeal the forex control. Then Sergei Voznesensky from the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation. We've been dealing with them on draft laws, on making changes to the federal law on forex control and on other matters, and the Ministry of Finance is the authority that is very positive, very liberal as concerning the forex law. Vladimir Chikin is a big lawyer, big person. As a lawyer, while actually earning money on the restrictions that we have in the forex law, but he stands for abolition of this law. And his colleague Ivan Khamenushko, another big lawyer, and the position, having the same position, and I hope they are going to share specific cases. And sometimes silly questions, companies come to them, to their legal firms, because of all those requirements in the forex law on reporting, on for exchange contracts, etc., etc. For them, it's very simplistic matters, and that's big. But that's a big problem for the business. Ilya Yesinsky, Deputy Director of Department of Financial Monitoring and Forex Control of the Central Bank of Russia. As I said, Central Bank, for the first time present in our session on Forex Control. Very interesting to learn their position on the measures being suggested in repealing the law. And Dmitry Volvich from the Federal Tax Service. We also meet with them regularly. The tax service is also now a body exercising forex control. They are also an organ where reports go on foreign accounts. Well, that is done for the purposes of forex regulation. And our international expert, Philip Kerf, he comes from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Why are we talking about their standards? It is OECD who developed automatic exchange rules of tax information between countries, and they're developing now standards dealing with people who want to avoid following those standards, where they come out of the residence in one country for tax evasion purposes, etc., etc. This subject is closely associated with the subject of forex control, and forex control is being used right now for the purpose of tax administration to exact taxes from tax residents, not only forex residents. So shall we move to presentations right now? Oh, the report, yes, you can collect this report at entrance to this audience. In the presentation, we have the main messages from that report, so that you don't have to read through that long document. Yes, what we see happening over the past several years, there are proposals from the Ministry of Finance in terms of draft law to liberalize forex control, in particular repatriation of ruble revenues, continuous change of Article 12 on restrictions on foreign accounts, on moving from repatriation term to the principle of accounting foreign exchange contracts. But as far as we know, this has not, well, facilitated the position of the business much. But we see things happening in terms of the change of the law of forex control. This means, on the one hand, that yes, this is good, we're moving towards liberalization there. But to be honest, the law that keeps being changed, do we need such a law? And these changes often are initiated because, well, sometimes we enact some lobbied articles to the law. If the lobby groups have this influence, and sometimes articles change on repatriation, on the return of the money to your accounts. But this year, together with Ministry of Economic Development, we wrote the draft strategy on export of services. That, surprisingly, that's a big problem. High potential of exports, but impossible to fully tap it. IT area, IT services, for foreign IT companies, they prefer executing electronic contracts. And this workflow associated with forex control, for them, it's not clear. They don't say why this additional restriction, why this additional function. Foreign companies don't want to take that upon themselves in contacting the Russian company. And they don't want foreign control. Construction area, they have preferential treatment in terms of forex control, but even those preferential treatments that they have, while considering for foreign companies, developing countries where they conduct their business, considering that the time of converting local currency into national currency is so long, well, they cannot meet the repatriation requirements, even in those preferential terms. So the federal law on forex control places restrictions on all types of companies, even those enjoying a preferential treatment. Let me give the floor to the business. We get to know each other a few days ago, a representative from the industry, big company, and restrictions of repatriation. Alexei, why is it a problem for you? Hello? We are in shipbuilding, ship reconstruction. There are many restrictions imposed by Western sanctions. That's a big problem. But once you start working on a foreign economic contract, well, I had a contract envisioned worth $500,000. It turned out easier to deal with the foreign Western restrictions than the domestic restrictions. There's this law on forex control. There's criminal code and administrative code. Administrative code, not that dangerous, so penalties are high. But criminal code, that's a dangerous thing. The statistics from Business Ombudsman, the president, well, his data is that a lot of criminal cases initiated against business people. Article 193 of the Criminal Code says, if I didn't get the money under the contract, then a criminal case can be instituted against me. 9 million is the threshold if they do not come immediately or within a year. If within a year it's up to 3 years, if it's more than 45 million, then it's 9 years. So I'm thinking then, by signing a foreign contract, foreign trade contract, and there's a big probability that I will not be paid immediately under that contract, then I'm aware that next step would be criminal case against me if I don't get paid. Imagine yourselves in my position. What would you do? You wouldn't sign that contract. And the fact that we have very few people in this audience means that export not well developed in this country. The Statistics Committee says the same. We have a lot of imports of machine and equipment, not much exports other than raw materials, because of the laws. Very difficult to operate in those regulatory conditions. Our internal sanctions, our laws are worse than Western sanctions. You have to fight it. Well, use the guillotine mentioned by the Prime Minister during day one presentation. Thank you. Alexei spoke about one of the restrictions in the federal law on forex control, that is requirement of repatriation. There's another restriction which I mentioned. It's a restriction on foreign accounts. When we're saying about the reform of forex control, we want those two restrictions lifted, repatriation requirement and restrictions on foreign accounts, because these restrictions, these two, discriminate against the Russian business, Russian exporters as against other developed countries where they don't have such restrictions. Even if there's forex control in their countries, these are temporary measures, like it was in Malaysia, Iceland. It's not a permanent regime. Now, why are we saying here? Well, that we need to improve tax administration and the system of counteracting money laundering and financing of terrorism in the context of the forex control. Well, before, we did not raise these points much. We started talking about that more and more because of the arguments that we hear from the state authorities. They tell us, well, okay, we repeal the law on forex control and forex resident, which is very close to tax resident right now. Well, then they tell us, how can we then control information on the assets of people who are outside of Russia? We can control that through reports that we get for forex residents. And what we see happening, those reports are being used for the purposes of tax administration. Before, until recently, you could agree with that. But now, Russia is a member of the automatic exchange of tax information, which means that all countries, Russia has agreements, bilateral agreements in place already with more than 80 countries, and we'll have to exchange information about foreign accounts, transactions, them, and well, Russian tax authorities will have information about Russian tax residents and their accounts abroad. So we know how to control that. Why do we need this provision in the forex law then? Now, restrictions on foreign accounts, this is against the very logic of providing those reports, because people who violate that without knowing about it, they put money on forex account which are not directly allowed by law. They may simply not producing that report because they would be afraid of violating the ministerial code and would be penalized. So what we see, forex law is being used on the one hand as an information, source of information, on the other hand imposes restrictions that work against the logic of providing reports, because honestly those transactions that are allowed and the transactions not allowed, not very clear between the difference between them. Why do we have to give permissions on foreign accounts? So we say, for as long as you're using the forex law for tax administration purposes, then the tax administration has to be improved. And the second point associated with the fact that we're repealing this notion of forex residents, because we collect the reports for tax residents. We don't need this notion of forex resident. Well, from recently we have this policy of de-offshoreization. Before, the tax rates were quite attractive for Russia, but now new instruments of de-offshoreization, controlling foreign companies, the ultimate beneficiary, this notion, etc. As a result of statistics, rich tax residents are moving from providing reports on foreign companies by buying for tax residency in other countries. Therefore, we suggest reviewing the very approach to the notion of tax residency. We have two types of proposals. First, based on a risk-oriented approach, that is, add a criterion for accepting a person as a tax resident through essential parameters like life interests and the place of factual business. But that relates to those tax residents who deliberately lost tax residency in Russia over the past several years and procured tax residency in offshore areas. That's very few individuals, but very wealthy individuals. We don't mean to say that that should apply to all. Second approach, as voiced by the Ministry of Finance, to reduce this term 183 days to 190 days. That would mean there would be more people, more tax residents, but we have to administer them. And we understand that 183 days is the approach accepted throughout the world. So then this is less of a priority Then approach number one, people who are leaving tax residency for the benefit of other countries. Therefore, in actual fact, when we say reform of forex control in terms of tax administration, what we suggest doing is very simple things. First, repeal the institution of forex residency, because that's done for the tax person. Improve the institution of tax residency and perfect these two instruments of de-offshoreization, making them more risk-oriented. For now, they do not comply with international standards, and as a result, there's uncertainty for the business. As I said, foreign accounts, for the purposes of forex control, we produce reports on foreign accounts and provide reports, but that is done for tax authorities to know what kind of access a person has abroad, what transactions they undertake, to be able to take taxes from these people. These transactions do not pose a threat to the public. This should be done only for tax purposes. The only danger is that these people, tax residents in Russia, do not pay taxes on those accounts and bills. So the standards should be not in the forex law, but in the tax code. Also, we need a complete participation of Russia in the system of automatic exchange of information. The more information we get from our foreign counterparties about our tax residents that have assets abroad, the more information we have about the taxes they have not paid.
Now, OECD is trying to identify various schemes and countries which are using schemes, proposing an individual to buy residency, and by doing so, this country is listed in blacklist. It's about 19 schemes identified by OECD, which are working against automatic exchange. So Russia could also takes this into account. And the second block of issues regarding money laundering, we see that some tools of repatriation prevents capital flight and return capital to Russia, but the objective of return of money to Russia could not be a target as itself. If we are talking about the flight capital or used for contracts, then we need to understand whether they earned honestly, or maybe this money do not violate the federal law 115. So they are not. This money is not used for some illegal activities. Mr. Moiseev used to say, as a counter argument for repatriation, today you brought money and tomorrow you brought them out. So repatriation is not working for flight capital. If repatriation is working to prevent money laundering, then let's improve this tool. We'll look into our legislation. Our legislation is in line with the FATF standards, the international organization dealing with these standards, and Rosfin monitoring is working very hard in order to bring our standards in line with the international standards. Some proposals dealing with the aspects of international trade, which would work for being sure that this money is not dirty. So maybe we need to add the list of unusual transactions in international trade. Then interaction with Rosfin monitoring, taxation services, and so on and so forth in terms of exchange of information. Once we have aggregated information, the more information, then the better tools to identify these transactions or shady transactions. And we know that we managed to ensure this interaction, and we need to reinforce it. And a classical proposal expand of international cooperation, financial intelligence services with foreign services, and so on and so forth for exchange of information. And the most interesting proposal is we've been guided by the proposals of the United States and China to count money laundering. This is the information for banks, those participants who are engaged in transactions, to develop guidelines to count money laundering for banks in order banks could have a clear picture about risks they could face. And the last slide. So this is just a summary of what I have said in terms of currency control. Here we are talking about not about the rejection of the institute of the currency residency. We are talking about other two blocks for currency regulations. So the legislation would be done by business. This is currency administration and other things I mentioned before. It could be done in two stages. First stage till 2021. Each year we change these figures moving forward, because everything could have been done 3 years ago, at least much of it. And so our proposal for the legislation authorities, executive authorities, is just to take much attention of the currency control, and we also implementing the national project regarding these issues regarding services. And of course we need to have a wider look at this in order to facilitate the life for our business. Thank you very much. Antonino, thank you very much. Before I give the floor to our dear panelists, I would like to focus your attention on some issues that I would like to discuss today. What we are talking about? We are proposing to abolish the law on currency control. Not only abolish, but maybe to amend it and make some amendments to the taxation legislation and other legislation. Taxation legislation. Look, on the one hand, it provides for a very tough norms for owners of the controlled foreign companies. So the currency law, as compared with the taxation law, provides for some loopholes or niches to circumvent this. You live for some days abroad, outside Russia, and you don't need to declare these controlled foreign companies, including accounts. Why? Because foreign banks, when according to the norms for mutual exchange of information, they look at the residency, taxation residency, and they send data to this country. If a Russian citizen, in fact, living here and having business here, spend a certain number of days otherwise, so he is not liable to pay taxes for controlled foreign companies and other norms of taxation. So this is a certain niche to circumvent this legislation. Two proposals to change the norm regarding residency. Having us changing the number of days of residency in Russia. So living in Russia less than 90 days, you can hardly manage your business here. So 83 days could work, but there is another norm, domicile. by the decision of the court, we can say you spent 183 days, but still you have business here, family here, and the main houses are here. So this is a mass phenomenon when people are trying to spend 183 days, holidays, vacation, and so on and so forth. So in total 183 days. So something wrong here. So I would propose to discuss this issue, how to amend, to adjust these norms. So now let's start discussion, and the first issue is I would like to ask all the panelists about their opinion about the main report by Antonina, and then we start discussing this issue. Thank you very much. I would like to start by Sergei Ivanovich Voznesensky, Ministry of Finance of Russia. Your opinion about the changes in currency control law, and to what extent they are sufficient, and do you agree that in principle federal law on currency control should be abolished or killed, as the panelist has said? Thank you very much for giving me the word. With respect to what is my attitude to the changes made recently to liberalize this area, we see objectively that all these measures have been taken positively, perceived positively. We changed the notion or definition as currency resident with respect to natural persons, and we established the rights of being abroad in aggregates in total more than 100 and less than 183 days. You shouldn't notify authorities about this your transactions. That founded reflections in the letters from the citizens we received. Before we got letters, I spent 3 days abroad, and then immediately you became a resident, and you should notify about your transactions and so on and so forth, which clearly violated the rights of those living abroad for quite a time or working abroad or on business trips and so on and so forth. So this complaints immediately disappeared. Some issues still remain on types of operations with securities. There are some problems with stock exchanges which have their own rules regarding listings. This is regulated by the central bank, and in this sense, central bank to some extent limits or restricts some possibilities of transactions with securities, and some questions were raised related with the precious metals. Still norms are of prohibitive nature. You can keep them on the foreign accounts, and some other transactions or operations which are not allowed so far, but immediately we felt the positive effects from these changes in overall. What are we doing now in terms of our current work? I believe you follow the situation within the national projects. Our task was to facilitate as much as possible the life of exporters in terms of currency control, and we introduced to State Duma the draft law which provides the cancellation of the whole number of norms, or at least their facilitation or simplification, and the government has made some amendments to increase the number of incentives or benefits in terms of the administrative sanctions. It is provided within 30 days. If you do not return currency, it's not prosecuted. The amount of fines on export revenues, currency revenues, now it's 5 to 30% from 100 to 75%, and non-repatriation of profits in foreign currency and in rubles. We have a certain fork. Fines are small with respect to rubles and up to 10%, and non-repatriation of foreign content from 5% to 30%. This is provided in the current version of the law. So professional participant of foreign economic activities established by the law. So we have a list of these participants. They have even more beneficial law of application of sanctions, just a warning if with respect to non-repatriation. This is or a fine from 3 to 10%. A lot of questions were asked on other articles of the law. Sometimes there are some cases that money go into foreign accounts, but this kind of transaction is not allowed by the domestic legislation. A lot of fines were issued, and now we have a norm or amendment that saying that if the violation of Part 1, which says that it is implementation of the prohibited operations and money comes to foreign accounts, but within 30 days they were moved to the authorized bank in the Russian Federation. Back then, in this case, a fine is not issued. And fine previously it was 75 to 100% by this provision. This norm for natural persons or legal persons would be quite relevant and would allow to ensure mobility of transactions with the accounts which are generated during the foreign operations. Then a waiver from fines if the export contract does not exceed 200,000 rubles or equivalent in foreign currency. Then we cancelled fines for violation and not submission of the reports of the authorized banks. Probably authorized banks could say something about this. So this norm is included into this draft law. This is what deals with the sanctions or fines. These are the recently adopted measures and would be considered by the government. Are you talking about 6 million where? In what document? Speaks without mic. No, I'm talking about the threshold of 200,000 rubles. Then no fines, no sanctions. So, as far as repatriation is concerned, now we're trying to lower the amount of fines, as I said, and it is decided to have a gradual cancellation of repatriation, and with full cancellation starting from January 1st of 2024. Now we have a draft law which would be submitted to the government for consideration. which provides that from January 1st, 2020, it would be 20% in the amount of 20% non-repatriate, and then we add 20% each year, and starting from January 1st, 2024, 100% the amount of the contract expressed in rubles, so there won't be no repatriation requirement applied. So this is what we decided, and the government will consider this in the near future. So we have a number of other draft laws. I can tell about them now or later, or I can make some criticism what I heard from the report. We are not going to abolish currency regulation. This proposal is strange. This report is posted on the website. Let's split the norms in civil code, criminal code, taxation code, and civil code that's payments by residents in the territory of Russia in foreign currencies are prohibited, meaning that everything other than that is allowed. And it's not by accident that current civil code and taxation code provides for references that to the currency regulations, meaning that currency relations sometimes are subject to modifications due to the political course of the state. You cannot change or amend the civil code or taxation or currency regulation law all the time or each year. Even if you write a certain prohibition for certain transaction, who will monitor these transactions or operations? Everything is prescribed in the currency control law. In civil law, I doubt that it is possible, the application of sanctions. Administrative violation code, it says that the violation of the part 1 of the currency regulation provides, so administrative codes can hardly be applicable here. I don't know about the similar articles in it. So currency legislation regulates not only the civil relations, like freedom of contracts between residents and non-residents, and it also deals with the public requirements to submit documents for ensuring financial balance. Where can you fit it in the civil code and responsibilities and so on? So it's not possible to work only on the basis of the civil code. Taxation code regulates the relations between citizens, legal persons, and the government regarding the payment of legally established taxes and duties. That's it. The currency legislation regulates the ownership procedures for currency transactions and so on and so forth. So you can hardly move some items to that legislation or this legislation. So the currency legislation doesn't cover all transactions which are not the subject of the investigation of the financial intelligence service. I mean, the norms to implement transaction through the accounts of the authorized banks or not. So the spectrum is this falling out of the coverage of this legislation. So you can hardly spread all these 3 blocks of issues on all these types of legislation, saying that life would be better after After that, I don't believe so. So we are moving instead in terms of revolutionary type evolution. Evolution. The representative of business on Article 193 of Criminal Code. Yes, we need to review the approaches from the criminal law regarding this article. In what form it would be implemented, we cannot predict. Much debated so far. Each ministry has its own position. All other agencies involved provides their own position. So it's unclear on the foreign accounts of natural persons. Additionally, we are trying to provide some amendments related to liberalization on types of transactions, transactions with precious metals and lottery bonuses and premiums. We received and collected all these issues from the citizens. This report is saying why grants are excluded from here. We discussed this issue before, but Rosfin Monitoring was against to include this issue with grants, because through grants you can ensure a certain level of money laundering, which is recorded by many financial intelligences of the world. So we are quite cautious, and so far it fell out of this scope, probably by the law of some state. This law could be put on the foreign accounts. After that it would be transferred here, and so that to avoid some kind of suspicions or violations by avoiding this draconic fine of 75 to 100% of the amount. Regarding the citizens, additional norms which are suggested: if a country is a member of FAT for OECD, then some restrictions and limitations are lifted as well. And if reports are provided, we have a certain threshold regarding the some amounts, like not exceeding 600,000. So these are some recent decisions. I can back to other recent draft laws, so that not to consume the time of other participants. Thank you very much. Just would like to make some comments. Maybe you are right. Maybe we need to have an evolutionary approach. Probably some should talk about radical, and the government would be acting quicker. The last example you cited, if someone is against saying that grant could be considered as money laundering attempt, it could be put on the foreign accounts and moved into foreign accounts. If it is money laundering, it should be blocked immediately, because this is a criminal process. If it is money laundering, this is a crime. It's the other story. So the system of risk management should immediately block this. You should convince the controllers that this is a grant and so on. So on the one hand, you are saying, and you can agree with that this is a grant, and you are saying that you could transfer this to Russia, but mechanism is working differently. I agree with you. Probably in what you are saying makes logic, but Rosfin Monitoring is responsible for this. Probably the representative of this entity could explain, but there is some contradictions, just a working contradiction. Thank you very much. 30 days explains everything. Let's move on. Vladimir Ivanovich Chicken, can you make some comments as a person who is dealing with business in part of the currency control? Are these changes positive or negative? Anthony, thank you very much for giving me the floor. First of all, I would like to start by saying about Antonina allowed me to pronounce just dirty words. I wouldn't use them. We will continue our session, beers against honey. Now we are discussing an issue, beers against honey. I am an attorney and I'm dealing with the currency regulation, and I would like that this law on currency regulation remain as complicated and confusing as possible, so that to continue making money on that. But yeah, everyone is thinking about that. Bloodthirsty attorneys, you are brought to the administrative sanction by Article 193. So attorneys are trying to save you billing by hours. Am I happy about this if this law is abolished? No. Please believe me. I'm not interested in dealing with the protection of people on currency violations.
Absolutely not interested, because a long time ago, in response to formal requirements of the law and repatriation or reports, there have been legal defenses devised already. A long time ago, we know a legal entity, if there's responsibility against a legal entity, would be considered violating Forex law if they had the opportunity to comply with the rules and norms for which the administrative liability ensues, but did not take measures, all the measures required to comply with the laws. Best efforts. Well, this is the approach. What does the law say if I don't do it? Well, I have a contract under which I made a prepayment, did not receive the goods. I have to get my prepayment back from a foreign country. This is right. Yeah. I have to get my money back. But the counterpart in a foreign country doesn't want to pay, to return the money to me, for many reasons. What solution then? For as long as we are in Moscow, we can go to arbitration court in Moscow. We get an order, a ruling of the Court of Arbitration. We notify the counterparty that we were in court with them, and that same ruling would say, well, we'll have a wording to remove our criminal liability under Article 193. So I've done my best effort. I went to court, and in the descriptive part of the court ruling, it would say that I'm not to blame. It was not a deliberate intention on my part. So that's how we defend people against the effect of Article 193 of the Criminal Code. That had been around for a long time. You don't have to think as a lawyer. You just use the standard approach to defend your client. Then foreign exchange revenues, failure to get those. What can we do about that? Let's create an offshore account or company. It's not a fashionable thing right now, not in the trend to create an offshore company. But some companies do like that. With their own offshore company, they sign an agreement on the delivery. They get an export contract, get Forex revenue from that, and live peacefully. They would have other problems on that, associated with taxes, transfer pricing, etc. And in the final run, there's 193.1. Nobody repealed that. They could claim that this is a fake agreement, negligent agreement. But we have defenses. That's what the lawyers do. Now, a few words about the law itself. Why do we think that it should be repealed? Because as a matter of principle, this law is built around the premises that you can write a law which would cover everything, every possible situation, and would provide the responses to all questions that may arise in the future. Colleagues, this is an impossible thing to do as a matter of principle. If we go deeper, it contradicts the law on the preservation of energy if we go deep inside the matter. But our lawmakers do think that that is possible. Second, this law has this property of completeness. What does it mean? Forex regulation. There's foreign trade, and this law should cover the whole system of foreign trade. And it has a complete nature. The lawmakers wanted to cover everything, all possible situations associated with forex regulation and foreign trade. But when they prepare that law, complete law, it will have internal contradictions. It was proven in 1930, mathematically, strictly proven that it would be like that. Examples from this law. Article 6 of the law on forex regulation or currency regulation. It says that forex transactions between residents and non-residents can be done without restrictions, except for forex transactions provided for in 7, 8, and 9 of this law. 7, 8 have been repealed. 9 prohibits settlement in forex currency in Russia and outside of Russia between residents of the Russian Federation. Okay. So we're through this article and we're happy. Okay. All other forex transactions have no restrictions. Okay. And 1525, the Code on Administrative Violations. Illegal forex transaction, reading through this law. Illegal transactions are transactions conducted in violation of this federal law. Sale and purchase of forex, foreign exchange transactions, settlements on ways to bypassing the authorized banks, or where settlements done through funds from foreign bank accounts that are illegally obtained on that account. Okay. These restrictions established by 1525. Well, a ban, is that a restriction or not? I believe a ban is a restriction. Evidently so. I equalize that, ban and restriction. I had one client. I tell them, Article 6, all transactions between residents, non-residents without restrictions. And that person is reading, yes, but I did that operation. But there's a code on administrative violations, and there's this article there. Of course, we thought of ways to avoid problems there. That's why the lawyers, there are lawyers for this purpose. But it turns out that the law says no restrictions. And the code, administrative code on administrative violations, and the criminal code says establish restrictions. Why? Why is it being done? Why do we have restrictions there? Why do we impose those restrictions ourselves, being bees? Why are we fighting against honey? And honey is exports. Can I interrupt you now? Just one more word. I am not going to go into debate about Kurt Gödel, but to tell you this, the law will have internal contradictions. It contradicts our interests, and our interests are to expand our business, export potential of the Russian Federation. The law, well, by having this law, we are shooting ourselves. well, the changes that are being proposed, they are good. Step by step, one goes far as I know. But better abolish the law. Well, you cannot do that. With this law, we cannot increase exports. Colleagues, we have very limited time, unfortunately. Thank you for this excellent presentation. I fully agree with what you said. You have 1 minute, okay? This is going to be about discrimination. It's discriminatory in nature, this law. Well, when I say discrimination, well, the way it is defined by the law, by the court. Let me quote one case. That's practice. What's discrimination? According to court, the difference in attitude to subjects, and that's what's proposed being done, is discriminatory if this difference does not have objective and reasonable explanation. Otherwise, in other words, if this difference in attitude does not seek the legal aim, or there are no reasonable relationships of proportionality between the used resources and the objective. So, well, the objective is more than the means to achieve that. That is discrimination. The means used to achieve the objective should be adequate to the objective, and in our case it is not. We have criminal responsibility for the violation committed by my counterparty if they manage to convince the court that I'm guilty. But that's for my counterparty. It's their obligation. They violated their obligation and my obligation. It's them. They did not pay money to me, and I will be put to prison for that, and I will be or penalized. Thank you. Thank you. We have talked about forex control. Very good discussion. May I ask now, Ilya from Bank of Russia, what is your opinion about this law? Do we need it? Does it contribute to the outflow of capital? And after that, Pavel Trunin, I would ask you to comment on our position in RANEPA. Good afternoon, colleagues. First of all, thank you. People who prepared this report, very interesting, a lot of substance there. But, well, there are some points that can be argued. Well, Evgeny, special thanks to you. With you, we've been working together, but he has been very detailed on what's been implemented already and the changes are in the making right now. After that, nothing to add. Do we need a law on forex regulation or control or not? This matter maybe go deeper than we can imagine, considering the time constraints. We have only 20 minutes to go, all the speaking, including the Federal Tax Service. So then I will focus in this statement on two aspects, briefly. So the biggest problem, the most controversial point of that law is the requirement on repatriation of export foreign exchange, foreign revenue. Most of the critics of the law said that that's a thing of the past that puts barriers on the development of business and it does contradict the declared objectives of increasing exports. No doubt. But there's another side to this matter, which is not touched upon by most of the experts, and only the regulator, my colleagues from the Federal Tax Service, from the Ministry of Finance, Rosfin Monitoring, and of course the Central Bank, know. Let me then remind you, sorry for the banality, the Constitution of the Russian Federation, Article 75, says that the main function of the Bank of Russia is the protection and assuring the stability of the Russian ruble. So that could be a conflict of interest. So stimulating exports on the one hand, and second, perform the function of the constitution, stated in the constitution. Of course, the Bank of Russia uses all instruments available to it to achieve the target. And that may sound a banality for you, but one of the instruments is repatriation. Let me give you a few examples. We witnessed, excuse me, let me remind you, we were witness to weaknesses, strong fall of the national currency over the recent time. First fall of the ruble came in 1998, big fall. 98, at 75% decrease. 2014, the start of sanctions of United States, European Union, another fall in the strength of the ruble, not as big as 1998 though, and thanks to repatriation to a large extent, and stronger sanction pressure in 2018 affected the volatility of the Russian ruble as against main foreign countries. And 2018, unlike previous years, the volatility was much less expressed, mainly, largely thanks to the fact that Russian exporters during 2018 actively sold foreign exchange revenues on the domestic market. And the Bank of Russia, therefore, is quite conservative about repealing the forex restrictions, in particular repatriation of foreign exchange. But the positive thing about that is that we're moving towards that direction, that we should stop that requirement on repatriation, but we should move slowly. That's our position, gradually. 2019, may I assure you, is not the year when we are going to repeal this requirement on repatriation. That second point in that report was the aspect associated between the correlation between institutes of forex control and institutes to counteract illegal profits. Several years ago, these two tools operated in parallel. Forex control addressed their own sides, financial control resolved their own tasks. Some years ago, they started converging. And what we have right now, a situation where the instruments of forex control are part and parcel of an effective system counteracting illegal incomes, in particular about reporting and provision by residents of documents to authorized banks who would analyze those, trying to find connections with financing of terrorism and money laundering. Well, that is a good report, a lot of substance. But use the norms from financial intelligence. It may sound paradoxical to you, but key substantial points them are not from Rosfin monitoring. The structure of the law is such that most of the authority goes to supervisory authority, and it so happens that most of the subjects from Article 5 on the law counteracting legalization are units under the Bank of Russia, and the Bank of Russia defines the methodology of financial monitoring system. So that's for your second part of your report. Please study the bylaws of the central bank, in particular provision 375. Why? Because, well, colleagues said there's no developed metrics of identifying within foreign transactions of transactions that could be associated money laundering and financing of terrorism. Well, this is not so. The Bank of Russia has more than 100 different metrics related to the subject, and the banks have to identify such transactions. That's two positions what we draw attention of banks to in terms of outflow of capital. One, well-known scheme paying advance payments for imports, commercial lending, especially for the import of services. Clearly, no documents could show the actual delivery of services. Normally these are just formal papers. And when you advance import of goods also, there are no restrictions on the length of the contract. Therefore, there's a possibility the advance payment will never get back. Now, how are these matters regulated in Western Europe? They say that they have a more liberal approach than in Russia, but I don't think so. That posit would be justified maybe 5 years ago. Well, we moved towards the world, a global economy. Now we can state there's no global economy, and in the coming 138 years there's no going to be any global economy. The biggest economies of the world start becoming isolated for the rest of the world. Then mean that positive movement towards the global economy does not work right now in conditions where the Russian economy, unfortunately, a priori much weaker than the economy of Western Europe and United States. In these conditions, clearly the movement of capital would be in that direction. Capital will always flow where a more competitive production and where it's more interesting. Unfortunately, not in Russia. Second example, which makes something which makes central bank to be more conservative. That is outflow of capital out of Russia within the CIS territories. There are no customs borders between countries of the CIS or Eurasian Union. We cannot analyze the documents confirming the movement of goods into the Russian Federation, and the data from our colleagues from foreign financial intelligence confirms that often the outflow of money is not accompanied with the inflow of goods. Another big problem, and here what Dmitri's area, of course, also associated with the difference in rates on VAT. Out of all Eurasian Union countries, the highest VAT rate is in the Russian Federation. So a CIS nation scheme or Eurasian Union to minimize costs associated with avoidance of paying VAT. And finally, we're in contact with the Minister of Finance, with the Federal Tax Service. There's general understanding of the fact that the forex regulation should be liberalized. But, let me confirm what support what Sergei has said, the government authorities, especially the central bank, want that to be an evolutionary process, no revolution, a staged approach. Thank you. Thank you. Exceptionally important statement. Thank you for your comments. Maybe we have some, well, we agree with you on most of the points, but not 5 years. We would want that to happen earlier than in 5 years. Pavel Trunin. Let's give the floor to our guests first. We're hosts here. We have some more time to give the floor to our guests. Federal Tax Service. Dmitry, can you comment on this, please? Well, I will not repeat what's been said already, just the things which refer exclusively to our competence. First of all, residence, the status of residency. Yes, it's our matter, tax service. You know, 2 years ago, the criteria of residency in the forex regulation were brought closer to the criteria. We have an Article 2007 of the tax code today, and that was a requirement. There was a request, and we immediately made that change. Nobody objected. We supported it. And today, there's no need of adding an additional criteria, 183 days, to the criteria of economic connection, domicile criterion. I think that's a matter that has to be done immediately. That's why it takes us out of the framework of the convention and the standards established throughout the world. And as a result, we're losing in this competitive battle or competitive discussion for the global capital of taxpayers, because we're disarmed in front of the tax authorities of other nations. Therefore, we have prepared in the tax service, and I hope and I think soon we're going to present to the Ministry of Finance our vision of how to change Article 207 Two, you have the same criteria as in other countries, the center of economic and life interests, not as you suggested, people who avoid paying taxes only. No, it should apply to everybody. While the ones who avoid paying taxes, we can apply tax evasion norms. But the criteria should apply to all. And if they want to avoid the status of tax residents, to avoid paying taxes, we'll be able to handle that in a separate document. Second, something related to the accounts and reports on the accounts in foreign countries. We as Federal Tax Service, whilst that does not matter much to us in which law that section is about the need to provide information about that for their foreign accounts for legal entities and private individuals. One thing though, if that is done within Federal Law 173 or somewhere else, tax code, well, it has to be expanded, while financial institutions should be clearly defined in Law 173. It's very limited scope of accounts that people should provide reports on. These categories should be brought in conformity with international standards, of course. As a minimum, accounts opened in any financial institutions, as mentioned in Article 21 of the Tax Code, in the automatic exchange of information, and extend international standard in that part of the law, applying it to electronic means of payment. Today they are outside it. It's like a terra incognita right now. It's huge channels of transferring funds right now, of assets, in particular foreign exchange transfers, including across the border, and that falls outside of the control of financial institutions, because there are various types of transferring monies without using classical financial institutions, the ones who have licenses, not necessarily banks. All, people throughout the world are thinking about that and do think there will be changes to the international standards. And this is what should make us busy right now. Not in which body of laws should that article be, whether in Forex or a separate section of the tax code, the way it should work. That's what should concern us right now, how to comply with the international standard. And of course, this provision should be extended to all types of liquid payment instruments. Well, maybe cryptocurrency also. But these forms of reports, of course, need to be applied to the foreign accounts abroad. Should be, well, opening those accounts, well, that should be liberalized to the maximum, on condition there's transparency there. If there's a risk analysis showing that we need to know more about the money coming to that account, why are they different from the tax obligations or based on the tax declaration of the taxpayers, then we may put some restrictions on the use of that account. But otherwise, that should be free and liberal. And that's where the lawmakers are moving after the information exchange. Well, 2 years. Already, I said, once we have automatic exchange, we can easily give it up. We're in this process right now. We understand the information we're getting from our foreign partners is much more than we had expected to get. So that draft law Sergei spoke about since 2020, you can stop providing reports on your foreign accounts opened in the OECD, and if countries and who have an automatic exchange with Russian Federation, we can do that, yes, by 2020. Thank you. Thank you. Since we're starting discussing automatic exchange, Philip, please, can you tell us a little bit about those tax avoidance scheme or in tax residency identified in OECD and what you suggest countries do about that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I do not speak Russian, so I'll give you the time to put on your headsets. I think, having listened to the debate here, one relevant question I would think for Russia would be that if it decided to rely on automatic exchange of information rather than the currency exchange rules, for tax compliance purposes, how can Russia be sure that it receives all the information that it is intended to receive under the automatic exchange standard? And I think in that connection there are two relevant factors, and I think it's not so much to do about how Russia defines or what is the definition in Russia about residence of its own individuals and entities. I think the two main factors here are how can you make sure that the other countries participating in the automatic exchange are effectively implementing the standard properly, so that all the financial institutions in these countries effectively report all the information that they are expected to report. So that is one factor. And the other factor is how to make sure that the CRS is not being circumvented, and the issue of loopholes and so on. And so for both of these areas, we have at the OECD a stream of work ongoing for the effective implementation of the standard by all the countries. The G20, when they asked the OECD to implement the standard, at the same time asked the Global Forum to put in place a monitoring process and a review process so that countries are reviewed on the implementation of the standards. So the Global Forum brings together 150 countries, and the countries are reviewing each other on how well they are implementing the standard. This is a process that has already started a while ago. It's a phased approach. So far, the focus of that work has been on making sure that countries correctly translate the standard into their domestic rules, so a review of the legislation, which has resulted already in hundreds of recommendations to countries to amend their implementing legislation to bring it in line with the standard. And this will move going forward also to a review of the effectiveness of the implementation with a focus on what is the compliance framework of a jurisdiction of a country to make sure that financial institutions are being audited and that the obligations are being enforced on the financial institutions. So that is the review process that is aimed at making sure that all countries that have agreed to participate in the standard properly implemented, and that process will ultimately result in some form of reporting to the G20 with ratings that will be given to countries, and that has historically always worked very well to incentivize countries to do this properly. The second factor is how to deal with potential loopholes. And this is an area where we have a dedicated stream of work in the OECD, where we systematically try to identify information about potential loopholes in the market. We have also a disclosure facility where people can, on an anonymous basis, provide information about potential loopholes. We analyze those and then we try to address them. It's in that context that we are, for instance, have been something that has reached the press a lot is the issue of passports for sale, residence by investment. It has been reported to us that residence by investment and citizenship by investment programs offered by countries are being misused by taxpayers to circumvent the common reporting standards. So these are typically referred to as the golden visas. So you can get, as an individual, in many countries, I think over 100 countries, you can now buy a residence or citizenship. This is not necessarily tax residence, but the residence that you purchase in a way by against a fee or through a local investment allows you or gives you documents that you can then use to misrepresent your actual tax residence to the financial institution that needs to report the information, which then ultimately gets exchanged. So we have done a review of over 100 of these programs, and they are offered not only in tax havens, they're also offered by OECD countries, and we have come up with an analysis of which are the ones that pose a risk for the integrity of the standard. We have defined criteria for that, and the criteria are that in the first place, it needs to be a country where the person would not be subject to tax on foreign source income or only to low tax. because obviously you are not going to represent that you're a resident in a country where your income will be taxed heavily. And the second factor that we have, criterion that we have taken into account, is whether in order to obtain the residence or the citizenship, there is a requirement to be physically present in the country. And so, because again, the idea is that somebody who wants to misuse these residence by investment schemes will not want to physically move and change his lifestyle to that country. So on that basis, we have identified approximately 20 schemes that are high risk, and we have put these on our website together with guidance on how financial institutions can deal with this. This is just an example of one of the issues we are dealing with in this context. As my colleague already mentioned, there is also the topic of e-money and cryptocurrencies, which are not covered currently. Well, e-money is covered, but not entirely. And so this is also something that we are looking at, and so we're constantly trying to identify where the loopholes are and trying to address them either through guidance or to changes, asking countries to change their legislation, or sometimes also through compliance activity that is then organized by the countries themselves.
Спасибо, Кир. И я сейчас попрошу.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask our last speaker, Ivan. Ivan specializes as a lawyer on currency control, and the previous issue. To what extent these tools on offshoreization are efficient to convince the people to maintain the Russian citizenship, and to what extent they are in line with the provisions of the currency control. Thank you very much. I tried to be very brief. In fact, I am a convinced supporter of the abolition of the law on currency regulation. I understand that law is a conservative thing, and it will take time to bring the obsolete norms in line with the realities of today, but we will never lose something important if we abolish this law, because all substantial provisions have been abolished recently. We abolished in the first place the provision to bring capital to foreign countries. What we see now, we see that this process is very active, and some structures, existing structures, especially those which are skillfully combined with amnesty and other norms, they produce some results. We see many clients coming or turning to us, asking us, please help us be back in the legal field, so to say, which means that these amendments are quite efficient, especially those mentioned by Mr. Voznesensky. This is the movement in the right direction. We see that this movement is quite slow, but law is quite a conservative thing. That is why it's so slow. Thank you very much. This is what I wanted to say. We still have some minutes left. Pavel, macroeconomic risks. I've repeatedly heard the idea that in order to understand better how the currency regulation works, and the central bank states as primary objective is stability of ruble. And as a macroeconomist, I always puzzled hearing this. If you look at the number of examples, then it's not clear, at least for me, why the existing system of currency regulation ensures stability. Theoretical aspects. Theory is not saying that the currency control can restrict the fluctuation of exchange rates, then let's compare and let's look at Russia and those countries which do not have repatriation, even if they have other elements of the currency control. We will never see any convincing proof that repatriation provides for a volatile exchange rate, or vice versa. And let's take it Russia, starting from 90s. Liberalization occurred at that time, it continues now, and example was given in 2008. The exchange rate fell considerably. In 2014 it fell as low as double. And we remember well that in 1998 there was obligation of the obligatory sale of currency proceeds, but it didn't prevent the currency exchange rate. Probably the fall was even deeper if we should we have abolished this provision. But restrictions could hardly be efficient. We always look at Malaysia, which introduced restrictions on capital flow, but there is a dozen of other examples where restrictions weren't helpful. So, and it doesn't stimulate the attempts to circumvent. That is why, in our opinion, I believe it's fair that we have a constitution which says that central bank should ensure stability of currency, but no convincing proof so far we can hardly notice. So I'm concluding this session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you for reading what we are writing, for criticizing what we are writing. Thank you very much. And I do hope that next year we traditionally meet here, maybe having something to boast of, and probably we will consider other steps for liberalization in currency control. Thank you very much.